طاب عصركم جميعا. أعداد الحضور تراجعت مقارنة بجلسات الصباح، وبالتالي في نهاية المطاف نركز على
The subjects about which we will be talking are also really very fascinating subjects, especially for those of us who are interested in theology, interpretation, and philosophy. So let me begin then by saying that I have the pleasure of introducing first my compatriot from Palestine, Dr. and Father Mitri Rahib, who is founder and president of Dar al-Kalima University in Bethlehem. Dr. Rahib is the author of many books, 50 books that deal with modern Middle Eastern church history and contextual theology, including his latest publication called Decolonizing Palestine, the Land, the People, and the Bible, 2023. His books and numerous articles have been translated into 15 languages. Dr. Rahib received many awards, including an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree from Wartburg Theological Seminary and an honorary doctorate from Concordia University in the year 2003. He holds a doctorate in theology from Philipps University in Marburg, Germany. His subject will be the development and expansion of Palestinian liberation theology. Very intriguing title, very important subject, which we will have the pleasure of learning about from Dr. Mitri. Please.
شكرا دكتور بهلول, and good to be with all of you. In English, but I'm going to switch to Arabic and give you do it in Arabic, especially that my colleague here also will speak in Arabic. So الشاعر العباسي بشار بن برد
has a very interesting quote whereby he says that you have to be contextual in what you say, which means when context changes, what you say, the content of what you say changes. And this is the framework of what is called the Palestinian contextual theology. So every place has its own kind of discourse, but this is very much consolidated in Arabic thinking. So that is why when we talk about theology, this is not a sphere that is static. No, it is ever continuing. And up until the end of the 19th century, the Bible was a liturgic kind of book. Christians would get to know the Bible through liturgy, and consequently would be able to have access or get to know particular paragraphs that are linked to Christian feasts. These things have started changing mid-19th century when the evangelicals came to the East, and they brought with them the Bible, and this was printed into a book that everybody would have access to. As a result of that, they established the printing houses, and the schools used to be the schools of the Bible. So this had led to a lot of change, we have to say. When we talk about the Bible now, it can be read by everybody when we talk about the scripture, the Bible, and the interpretation can be carried out by many people, and not only the church. I would like to talk about 7 stages belonging to both the 20th and 21st century when it comes to the development of the liberation theology in Christian theology in Palestinian context. So we are talking about contextual theology. So this started in the 20s of the 20th century. So we have to take also the Balfour Agreement. Of course, we cannot forget it. So the basis of that was colonial, political, and as Balfour himself said, that religious ideas had an impact on him. So with the beginning of the 30s of the 20th century in Palestine, so a number of missionaries came to Palestine and they talked about and called for the return of the Jews into Palestine. And this is linked to the second return of Jesus Christ. And this has led to a feeling of confusion, because this is part of their feelings of Palestinian Christians, because this is closely linked to their own religious identity. So we have seen the beginning of theology within the Christian church where I was a priest, and we have also Karim Aboud, the father of Karim Aboud, who was a priest. And during the great strike that took place in Palestine, we have seen a number of seminars that were conducted, particularly in the evening, whereby they used to tackle new topics such as Zionism and the Old Testament, Christians and the homeland. So these were topics that were not tackled a great deal in the past. And we can see also another priest, Hanna Bahout, who used to work in the same place and who talked about the misuse of the Bible or the Holy Book. So this was the beginning of such kind of evangelical activities. And also we have also some Catholic also activities that have been carried out, particularly by bishops, Catholic bishops, this in cooperation with the British royal community, and also and there has been a promise whereby there was discrimination against Muslims and Christians. And as a result of that, those moves that were made were rejected. There is something that is very important. The bishop said that the Balfour Declaration will make the native Palestinians, their situation is going to be similar to the Native Americans. Their fate are going to be similar. And he said that the church is the new Israel. And he concluded by saying, if Palestine is important for the Jews, it is going to be 10 times more important for Christians. And consequently, here we see the beginning of new ideas, new Christian Palestinian ideas. And this was the beginning of what was thought to be a defense of the situation. So when we go back to the Nakba in 1948, this had led to perhaps a moment of stalling this kind of contextual theology, particularly that the Palestinian intelligentsia was forced to leave. They used to live in Jaffa, in Haifa, in the Western Jerusalem. Many of them were forced to leave, and the West Bank was under the rule of Jordan, and the king of Jordan was able to contain the Palestinian intelligentsia and make it part and parcel of the Jordanian government at the time. and consequently liberation became no longer important, and humanitarian aid became more important. A number of humanitarian agencies have been established, such as the Pontifical Mission was established in Jerusalem, and the DSPR that serves Palestinian refugees. During that period of time between the Nakba and the Naksa, so we've seen that those topics have started changing as a result of Pan-Arabism, and we have seen the Arabization of the church by foreign leaders, and Christians were Arabized to some extent, and the bishop church or archbishop Arab church and the use of Arab was in reference to Arabism, and the Luther Jordanian church to which I belong also has been changed. So the first stage that I would like to talk about, or station, is after the Naksa, 1967. And we know in the 1967 war, there have been a number of religious insinuations linked to the war. Many talked about the Six-Day War in reference to the creation of the universe by God in 6 days. And in the Western world, we have seen the idea of the small country that was fighting the larger Arab countries, and as a result of that, a new challenge appeared before Christians and not only Arabs. And the Palestinian cause became a cause of faith, and this was the first document that was issued, which is the Palestinian cause, the challenge of Christian faith. So it was written in Beirut in 1967 by 4 theologians. During the same period, we have seen the Student Union for Palestinian Students have organized a number of conferences about the Palestinian cause, and 1968 we have seen the first recognition of the PA. And we have seen also the theology of integration between the armed strife, nonviolence, and diplomacy. And after 1967, in 1964, the liberation movement, the PLO, that's what he mentioned at the beginning, the PLO and many Christians moved towards the east, such as, towards the left, such as George Habas, who established the Popular Front, and also we had the Democratic Front that was established as well. And during this period, we have seen this theology of engagement. So this was the situation back then. So we have had also Ibrahim Ayyad, who is a father from the Catholic Church. In 1967, a year after the establishment of the PLO, we have seen Yasser Arafat and Khalil al-Wazir, who went to his house. He was in Beirut, and they asked him, do you believe in armed strife or struggle and diplomacy? He said that there should be an armed struggle and diplomacy, both at the same time. Ibrahim Ayyad plays a very important role afterwards. So he was the ambassador of the PLO to the Vatican, and particularly that he spoke Spanish. He was also ambassador in another area. And also we had Hilalium Kabushi, who became also a bishop. And in 1974, he was imprisoned for smuggling weapons from Jordan to Palestine for the PLO. So Hilarion believed in armed struggle. And the third personality was priest Elia Khouly, who became a bishop in the Archbishop Church. He was imprisoned for his political activities. In 1974, he was elected in the executive committee, and he became vice president of the National Council with Abdelhamid Sheikh al-Sa'ih. And the fourth personality is priest Shahada Shahada, who was from Palestine, and the main issue was the land, because Israel took most of Palestinian lands and territories. And in 1967, he was part of the president of the National Committee for the Defense of the Land. And then we had celebration of the Day of the Land. And he was part of this church. In the second phase, before that, I would like to tell you that Shahada studied in India, and he believed in ideas by Mahatma Gandhi, and also it was the same era of Martin Luther King, and also the conflict for freedom and so on. And these personalities were very much influenced by these kind of ideas that prevailed during that period. So we have had the Palestinian theology as a narrative theology. Perhaps this is linked to what Fatima talked about when she talked about novels and the importance of these novels. And this started with the first Intifada in 1987. And during this period of time, we have seen Christian Palestinian theologians used to write their own accounts, their lives, where they were forced to migrate from Bissam, from Kufr Bur'um, a Christian village that was destroyed by the Israelis. And the reason was that there was international interest in the Palestinian cause. Many delegations came to Palestine from the US, from Europe, and so on. Many of them wanted to meet with the Palestinian Christians and listen to them. This has encouraged each of those personalities to write their own accounts or novels and try to publish them. And here we see perhaps in excess of 20 biographies, autobiographies that have been written. The evangelicals, they wrote in English, and the Catholics, they wrote in French, and this is normal. The fifth station or stage is the institutionalization of Palestinian theology. And after that, this started in Beirut, and the intelligentsia, or the center of intelligentsia, moved from Beirut to Palestine. And consequently, we had the political dimension that was covered in Birzeit University, at Birzeit University, and the religious part was covered by in Beit Lahem. So the first, we had the first 5 persons who had their PhD in theology. We had Naim Atiq, Michel Sabah, and myself. And we have had 4 centers that have been established as a result of that, and consequently Palestinian theology was institutionalized. In 1987, we have had Liqa Center for Religious Studies has been established, and Julius Khoury was part of that effort, and they called it kind of local theology, contextual theology, where they concentrated on Arab theological thought. And also they used the term, the theology of liberation, and the center was established, and the center tries to bring about these ideas from the US to Palestine. And also we have had messages by Michel Sabah, and we have had the first letter that was written in 1988, and one of the most important writings by the patriarch, and where he talked about Palestinian religious thought. And we had Dar al-Nadwa that I establish and concentrates on contextual theology. This was previously, perhaps he was talking about the pastoral letters that was written, and of course we had the Cairo Palestine document. Some think that it is linked to Cairo in Egypt. No, this is in reference to the Greek term, which is the decisive moment. So this was written by 14 of us from the different 4 centers that were established, and we leaned on the experience of South Africa in their fight against apartheid. And there was a document that was written in South Africa. The title of that document was Cairo, South Africa. And this theology is the theology of advocacy. And here we need to defend the Palestinian cause in the different international churches and also international gatherings and fora. The 7th stage was in 2010, where we have had the different evangelical movements that was launched by the Palestinian evangelicals, and they have launched a conference that was entitled Christ on the Barrier, on the checkpoint, yeah. And this is the 7th stage. So at the end, I would like to share with you some of the ideas that I try to develop in this context. I was not able to talk at great length about each and every stage. What we are trying to do, or have been trying to do in the last 10 years, is to see how we can develop theological ideas that can deconstruct these ideas in order to have a new understanding when we talk about the colonial thought. And also the importance of Palestine. What I would like to say when it comes to this kind of theology, we cannot understand the Bible in isolation of the geopolitical dimensions. This was the first time that theologians interpreted the Bible from hermeneutic geopolitical perspectives. So what I would like to say is that Palestine throughout the ages was surrounded by 5 regional powers. We can call them empires sometimes. Egypt in the south, Europe, Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran in the Mesopotamia. These regional powers have influenced Palestine in different eras. Many times, Palestine was colonized by these great powers. That is why we have to understand the Bible as a resistance literature. This term was coined by Ghassan Kanafani in his book Al-Adab al-Muqawim, or Resisting Literature. That is why we have to read it as such. And consequently, because there are questions posed about God, Allah, if we look at the oldest texts or paragraphs in the Bible, they date back to 10 centuries before Christ. And this was the beginning of empires in the Middle East. When we talk about empires, we talk about questions posed about Allah. When you are occupied, as it is the case now in Palestine, you think that the occupying force is Allah because it has all the power in their hand. They can force you to leave home, and you would ask him where God, Allah, is. Why have you left us alone? We believe in you, but you've left us stranded alone. So the empire forced people to pose questions, and we cannot understand the Bible far from the idea of the Bible. And when Christ came, he came with the idea, which is the Malakut of Allah, and this was an empire that was under Roman occupation, and Malakut Allah, or the kingdom of God Almighty, is the alternative to the empire. So this is how we read the Bible, and if we do that, we see that the Bible is a Palestinian book par excellence. So our problem, us as Palestinians, Israel has not only confiscated the lands and territories, but also the narrative, and this entails that we should reread the Bible as a resistance literature, irrespective of the religion of those persons, because those faiths changed with the different empires. Their identities have changed, but the people who lived on those areas, they have had this experience. This is very briefly what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this beautiful presentation. Now ننتقل الآن إلى الدكتور عمير أورسوي، وسوف يتحدث عن مسار النقاشات حول القرآن في تركيا،
الخلفيات and methodologies. Highly interesting and probably controversial subject. Okay, so let me introduce Professor Omer. He's a professor of Quranic exegesis at Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany. He obtained his PhD from Ankara University. His subject was semantic interpretation of the Quran. Since 2006, he has lectured at various universities in Vienna, Innsbruck, and Salzburg. And he has led several research projects on reconstructing the dynamics of Quranic revelation, with one of his notable achievements being the digitization of At-Tabari's exegesis. His research interests focus on the history of the Quranic text, early manuscripts, historiography of Quranic discourse, and Quranic hermeneutics. That really brings back memories to me, because at one time in my life I almost went that way towards Quranic collection and early collection and exegesis. Okay, please begin, Dr. Omer.
شكرا دكتور رجاء للتقديم اللطيف، وأرحب بكم سيداتي وسادتي. وبهذا الصدد سعيد بتقدم مسموع تقدم بخالص شكري.
This gratitude to Dr. Susanna, and through you to the Center for the kind invitation and your trust in me. I will try and give a brief summary of a long text I have prepared, and I hope that through the questions and answers we'll have the opportunity to improve this text before publishing it later on. In order to understand the current debate on the Quran in Turkey, this requires us to look into researching the historical patterns of dealing with the Quran in the Turkish context. And we can summarize the most important centers in three contexts. First, the presidency of the religious studies and the Sharia faculty as it's known in the Arab world, and the religious universities, including the civil society organizations. And because of the lack of time, I have to ignore some of these chapters and move directly into the central themes and the discussion on the Quran in Turkey currently. The debate currently in the Quran focuses on some essential and fundamental themes which have been represented and sometimes in a contradictory manner in the last decades because of the modernist and Salafist and traditional contexts are not exclusive to Turkey. I will ignore them in this part of the presentation and focus on three main themes which form the central debate on the Quran in Turkey and can be understood as a reaction to the secularist, Salafi and modernist. The first issue is the issue of saying that the Quran is enough without the Sunnah, and this is known as the Quranic movement because they rely solely on the translations of the meaning of the Quran because they cannot read the original text in Arabic. This is a trend which causes for exclusively relying on the Quran as a source of legislation and ignore completely the authority of the Sunnah, the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the schools of thought in the jurisprudence. And this movement did not have any interaction with the sub-Indian continent, despite the similarities in the outlook by the two schools of thought and of the hermeneutic approach. And what is striking in this is that the fact that the birth of this movement in the 60s and the 70s from the 20th century has coincided with the widespread of the ideas of the reformists like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani and Muhammad Abdu. And in the Turkish context, a number of university professors like Hussein Qatai, I completely forgot about the PowerPoint. I forgot the picture also. In the Turkish context, professors like Hussein Atai and Sulaiman Atash played a role in crystallizing a rational interpretation and considered most of the traditions were additions, latter additions, and they contradicted the spirit of the Quran. In the 80s and the 90s, through a lot of proportions by well-known personalities like Shahid Shakmagil, This is not working. The presentation is not working. دائما أقرأ أنساه دائما. I wanted you to know these names. They are quite unknown personalities. It was my mistake. My apologies for that. So later on, other university professors played a role in through a simplified and attractive discourse to spread these ideas. Mustafa Islam Oglu, Muhammad Oglu, Janar Tassan, amongst the famous names, and some younger generations like Yüksel, they took this to the extreme, who they rejected the prophetic sunnah as a binding religious source of legislation or authority. The followers of this trend see that the Quran is suitable for all places and all ages, and therefore cannot contradict with scientific facts or ethical standards, and they claim that the fact that the earth is flat and the development stages of the fetus in the womb are mentioned in the Quran, and the word فَضْرِبُوهُنَّ or hit them can be interpreted as divorce them or leave them. And they also reject the punishment of cutting off the hand of the person who steals, and they interpret it not as a physical punishment but as some sort of a reprimand. And some educated religious class in major cities accept this. They want to strike a balance between their Islamic religious beliefs and the current trends in thinking. The second approach, that was in the 1990s, when the Quran's utilization ideologically was very widely spread, and this was faced by some schools of thought which belonged not to the religious trends, but more to do with those secularists who rejected the Quran on the grounds that is a discourse which was born in a specific historical context, which was addressing people who were around at the time of revelation, and therefore it should be taken in the context of whether legislative, linguistic, or discourse which was aimed and targeting the people at that time, and it should be looked at and viewed differently with a counter narrative now, which called for a new definition of the Quran, for example, which takes into consideration the hermeneutical, linguistic, semantic, and other aspects. Muhammad Sa'id Khatib Oghla was a main figure who called for this counter narrative against the secularists, and he led a group which translated the Quran into Turkish. Ilhami Gilar, Al-Faqir, Adil Chifchi tried to justify some ideas which were more inclined towards the ideas of Muhammad Arkan, Nasr Hamid Abi Zayd, Hassan Hanafi, which is rather a simplistic or rather naive interpretations. Mustafa Öztürk, and when he started appearing in the Turkish media, and this was accompanied by some criticism by both the traditionalist camp and the reformist camp. Sorry. The central theme in this approach in understanding the Quran considers the Quran as the outcome of a revelation which was manifested in a continuous experience of the first Islamic or Muslim group who received this revelation. And against this background, the historical approach school of thought goes to saying that some of the concepts which are known in the Quran may not be compatible with the contemporary ideas, especially when it comes to some scientific facts. And also it does not address the future events. Also, for this reason, many of the verses which are reinterpreted now as referred to as scientific, like the stages of the formation of the fetus, they claim that they are either were known at the time of revelation, and therefore it's no coincidence that the representatives of this movement use Ash-Shatibi and Aisha bint Abd al-Rahman Ash-Shatibi and others because they focus on the discourse of the Quran, and they interpret the verses on chopping up the hand of the thief or the word beat them. They consider them as literary, meaning what they said, and think that applying them in every age is not compatible to the essence or the spirit of the prophetic message, because the Quran belongs to its historical context, but Islam is more dynamic and is evolutionary and requires the activation of principles which take into account the changes in reality. The followers of this trend, who are described as historical, or the school of historians or historical thinkers, which are considered dangerous by the traditionalists, they, however, have some respect amongst the reformists and modernists, because they do not reject modernity or modernism outrightly, and because of some Salafis who rely on the narratives almost completely, and despite this black propaganda in the last decade, we can say that this trend is very active in impacting the attitudes of a number of young academicians, especially in the schools of theology. Despite that, by and large, these people decline to express themselves freely and openly for fear of being accused of losing their professional standards. I remember two brave women, Hidayat Tuksal and Hadia Unsar. There are two exceptions, in fact. The followers of this trend sorry, I'll ignore that point. Some of the most sensitive issues surrounding the discussion over the Quran in the Turkish context is the question of revelation, or the source of the Quran. So, can you consider the Quran, its current form, a direct manifestation of God's word or God's will, or as some say, this was a human product? So, in other words, who formulated the Arabic of the Quran, which we cannot deny that it derives its source from divine revelation, and Sulaiman Atta, since the last 70s, dealt with this problem that the words of the Quran are not emanating from God directly, but it was formulated by angel Gabriel in Arabic for that to be understood by the Arabs, and he refers to a verse which says, these are the words of a messenger. Mustafa Öztürk specifically says that the Quranic text was formulated by the Prophet himself. He used to receive the Quran as divine inspiration, but he formulated the words in the Arabic language, and this has seen wide-ranging acceptance by some young people. And despite that, when it comes to the Turkish revelation, the version also takes its importance due to some internal justifications, because it can serve two main purposes. First, that this is to say that God is free from being confined to the boundary or bounds of any human language. And secondly, there are some meanings in the Quran that the contemporary Muslims cannot accept or live with, because they represent to many people a transitional model which tries to reconcile between the critical attitudes and the religious affiliation. In fact, many followers of this trend call themselves Deist Müslümanlar in Turkish, which means Muslims who believe in Allah only. And this is a contradiction from a philosophical point of view, but it expresses what they call themselves as someone who's suffering from religious fatigue. Or what's worth mentioning here is that their agnosticism or theism or atheism is on the increase amongst the Turkish Muslims in the last decade, despite the fact that there aren't enough field studies to testify to that. Despite the lack of trustworthy studies, Hamdi Taifour has interviewed some former Muslims, including some formerly religious leaders, teachers in theological schools, and this reflects the depth of this trend amongst Muslim men and women. Until now, none of the religious institutions, neither the Presidency of Islamic Affairs or religious universities or religious groups, have not engaged in any serious self-criticism or new formulation of by way of response to this changing context. Finally, and my conclusion, it becomes apparent from the presentation that we say the three approaches that we mentioned can be described as objections to the imposition of Islamic interpretations, because the ones who present these interpretations present them as real Islam, despite the fact that they are contradictory to the beliefs of the majority of Muslims today. So therefore, it may not be unfair to criticize these three approaches together, because they include, even if partially, to be reactionary in nature. And on the other hand, the traditional religious institutions do not seem to be able to keep up with these challenges, and they repeat the traditional and the legacy which has been going on, and they tend to be selective in their response when there is criticism of the ethical standards that most Muslims tend to accept now, and the vast majority of the people in the world accept. So therefore, the dealing with Quran in modern Turkey is not just an independent academic discipline, but it is a reflection of the way the society is trying to understand, and the interaction between political, cultural, and other identity questions interact. So therefore, the correct understanding of the Quran is a reflection of deeper changes in society and the role of Islam in a society which is moving more towards modernism.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور.
I have some questions now. If you can, please mention your name so that we can. Okay. لحظة. Okay, go ahead, Elizabeth, if you would like.
عندي سؤال للمتحدثين. دكتور متري أول مرة بسمعك عم
You differentiate between the contextual theology and the liberation theology, how important this distinction is. Dr. Omar, I'm looking forward to reading your whole paper. I would have wanted you to talk about the context in which we see an encouragement of one method over the other. So, and a method that you choose, and give us, as a result of that, an idea about the context that would lead or encourage one idea or one method over the other. Jihan Sfer, I have a question to Dr. Mitri Rahib. Talking about 1948, the Quakers, they used to give humanitarian aid to Gazans. So was this carried out by the Quakers and the Evangelical Church? And the second question, during the same period in 1947, 1 year before Al-Nakba, there has been a Maruni Motran, his name is Inyas Mubarak. He proposed a Maronite bishop. He proposed a new method to be carried out. So I think not many know about this component when it comes to the history of Palestine and the history of both Lebanon and Palestine. We have 4 participants or 4 questions that have been posed. Let me add 2 questions from my end. Dr. Omar. The third approach is the most controversial approach. Do you think free expression is allowed in Turkey without any harassments? Because what is said is that what is being said in the Quran is the literal version of Allah. Hasn't this been criticized or opposed? Have there not been any expressions of fear vis-a-vis that? Since those do not deny these historical ayahs cannot be denied as being the ruling of Allah. So should we forget about them, deny them? What shall we say vis-a-vis that? Dr. Dimitri, I have a question with regard the tenor of the theology if we compare it to the liberation theology that we used to hear about from South Africa. What can we say? What is the content of such kind of theology? You said that we have to look at the Bible as resistance literature or a literature of resistance, and that this kind of literature dates back to some time before Christ and perhaps to the Old Testament. And should we link that to context of the Jews and their link with the Romans and the invasion they have been subjected to, and the all of this, does it not establish a relationship between the history of the Jews and the Palestinians and the captivity that existed then, that they were subjected to? And this is one avenue that all Jews are not the current Israelis, and we can coexist with the Jews of the past, but the modern Jews is a new story. So these are the questions that we would like to pose, at least in this round of questions. Dr. Suzanne, your question is very important but very difficult to answer, in my view. We cannot link independent views to specific contexts, because the same context can lead to different outcomes. But we can see the incentives, perhaps, or the reasons for what has happened. Perhaps this has led to the establishment of new viewpoints in the Turkish context, particularly with regard to discussions about the Quran. When I posed this question, when I asked this question to myself, I think that the translation movement in confrontation of new ideas coming from different parts of the world, starting from the Islamic world and, of course, from the West, these translations and this confrontation of new ideas coming from different contexts, this plays a very important role in new approaches that are different from each other, in the appearance of new approaches that are different from each other. For instance, differences of opinion are possible, but you cannot control people's thoughts and ideas. Yes, this is allowed, of course, but in Turkey we have many atheists. Opinions about the Quran there are many opinions about the Quran, but if you work in a university, perhaps this is possible. Very briefly, the question posed by Elizabeth, these are nuances, but I wanted to underline these nuances. We as theologians, we do not see a difference between the local theology and the nuances that we see when we read the different literature, when talk about local theology that focuses on Islamic Christian dialogue and Arab Christian literature up to the Middle Ages. So we have this Islamic Arab dimension, which is perhaps the most important dimension when in the liberation or theology of liberation. So the subject or topic of political liberation is the most important topic in this regard. When we talk about contextual theology, this theology focuses on trying to deconstruct colonialism. So the deconstruction of colonialism today is a kind of a global theme or topic and not only particular to Palestine. And this is a response to your question. So the study of theology in Latin America focused on poverty. In South Africa, it concentrates on race, color, and so on. In Palestine, theology was not linked neither to race nor to poverty. It is a political subject, topic, but religion was politicized for colonial reasons. So, for instance, in Latin America and in South Africa, the Bible was used against the native people. And this was not called Israel, and this was the reason why people saw that Israel has confiscated, expropriated the narrative for settler colonial reasons. And perhaps this leads me to your second question. We as Palestinians, we think that we do not have an issue with the Jews as Jews. We say that the Jews have always been part of Palestine. Palestine has always a pluralistic country in terms of ethnicity, faith, and so on. But the Jews that have come from Europe, those Jews are the last colonial European campaign. And when you look at the Christian-Jewish dialogue, is a white dialogue in the sense that it is whites talking to whites. Who are not whites are not in a dialogue with each other. So these are, in a sense, Europeans talking to each other. Our problem is not with the Jews. It is to do with the Zionist colonial, settler colonial movement. And we have to differentiate between the two. Many Jews in Palestine have become Palestinians, and many have become Christians, and many of them have become Muslims. But if we look at this matter from a geopolitical perspective, this would be linked to the question that was posed about the narrative and where is it accurate and where is it not accurate. It has to do with liberation. Is this account or narrative, is it taken advantage of or used for enslaving or liberating people? Taking into account a number of criteria, and we cannot do without those criteria. Those Jews that have they come to occupy the land, or have they suffered as we did? For instance, you would hear talks about the first Jewish revolution and the second Jewish revolution in the first and second centuries, similar to the first and second intifadas, as if these two are different from each other. And these are not. The people, the population of the land have always been in a revolution against the occupying power, and liberation is the most important topic, and not belonging to a particular faith. The Quakers, they worked directly in terms of the charitable organizations and not through a church. And the Christian Palestinians, they were always against the religious state because they saw that, and the establishment of Israel as a state for the Jews is an attempt to sectarization of the Middle East. And this would put an end or deny the right for open pluralism, and that should be a separation between religion and state. Do we still have time for an additional question or two? Microphone, please, if we can kindly ask the speaker to use the microphone. أود أن أطرح السؤال باللغة الإنجليزية.
Well, when you mentioned about translations of some works like Fazlur Rahman or Hassan Hanafi, or thinking about the comparison between what is happening in Iran and Turkey, most of the discussions that we have about the Quran, about Mas'alat al-Wahy, about what is the nature of Wahy, mostly the aim is, well, at least allegedly, is to secularize the kind of religious law that we have. That is the aim of the public intellectuals. You mentioned about Soroush, Shabestari. Most of them, they target religious law and they want to secularize those kind of religions by talking about Quran, by talking about Sharia or fiqh. And now, given the secular law that we have in Turkey, what is the implication of these discussions? What is the implication of these tarjumat? So suppose we have these discussions in Turkey right now. I just want to know, I want to see the comparison here. I know the implication in Iran. What is the implication in Turkey, particularly given the secular law that already we have? Thank you. Is that clear now? I hope the question is clear. Thank you.
One more question from way back. I thought I saw a hand.
شكرا.
Of observations to the two speakers. The first question is to do with the theology of liberation. The theology of liberation was established through a network where we see criticism of colonialism. So we see a kind of a linkage between the two, on the basis of which the common ground was to make religion out of legitimizing authoritarianism. So religion was used as a force whereby authoritarianism was legitimized. But the theology of liberation wants to take this kind of practice outside this sphere and put it at the heart of all discourses and movements that worked in order to achieve liberation. The problematic, in my view, is that, don't you think that such use of religion from the perspective of liberation, don't you think that that would establish the mundane use or political use of religion? Don't you think that the political use of religion to call for liberation or to support liberation, but also to support colonialism and settlement? Look at the example of what is happening now in Palestine. What is happening now in Palestine, we have some who use religion at the heart of resistance and liberation movement. And on the other hand, in the Israeli side, religion is used in order to legitimize colonialism. The Zionist movement has used Judaism to legitimize its settler colonial power in order to show that this colonial power or colonial act is an attempt to retrieve what was lost. So, in my view, what the liberation theology is facing is this in particular. So how can we make religion a discourse, a practice at the heart of the liberation movement and not to be used as a tool for the hegemony or the legitimization of hegemony and colonialism? My question or my remark is to Dr. Omar. Here I would like to ask you, are there differences between the Quranic studies in the Arab countries and in Turkey? So what are the particularities of the Quranic studies in Turkey? I'm asking you this question because I am very much knowledgeable about Quranic studies in the Arab world, and I know that these studies, if we put aside the studies that are issued or published by traditional religious schools or centers such as Zaytuna in Tunisia, we will find two main trends. We have the one that echoes the controversy about things to do with Islamic legislation. So there have been a number of issues such as, and whereby we have seen the contextual reading of the rulings of the Quran that are closely linked to particular historical moments or periods of time, and that cannot be implemented in other historical eras, and that Islamic legislation should be based on reliable, trustworthy sources or references, and here that the Quran should be enough compared to Sunnah or consensus, religious consensus. So those studies of the Quran, they concentrated on problematics of legislation and also the Quranic discourse. There is another kind of discourse that looked at the Quranic texts from criticism or from critical writing, in order to look at the text, how it was formed, where did it come from, who contributed to the creation of the text, irrespective of whether these are secular theses or religious theses. So all of these were attempts to look into how these texts were formed and also the historical dimension, and also looking at the anthropological dimension and how such studies attempted to learn, particularly from the hermeneutic approaches. Perhaps that would be much more in keeping with the era or the current era when it comes to the Quranic text. Do you think that the studies in Turkey are different from the studies of the Quran in Islamic contemporary Arab thought?
Thank you all. I have not such as much a question, but an impression with all what we've been hearing all day, and in this session by Dr. Metri and Dr. Omar. And this impression goes to that the religious factor, as it appears in the first day of the proceedings of the seminar, is not the primary, so it's a secondary or a following element which follows politics, because all this discussion, hermeneutics, interpretation, etc., are a response to political developments and political conditions. And this is contrary to the cultural aspects which seem to be governing the Arab thought. So are we faced with a new approach to religious elements to push them to a secondary position? Although the prevalent trend is that the religious element is in the lead, and or even the wars are explained through religious justifications. I'll be brief regarding the question by the doctor. We have two choices here. The first is we put religion aside and say that religion can be this or that, so therefore let's keep our distance from religion in all our dialogues. This means that we will allow those who want to misuse religion, those occupiers, The other direction we can go in is that first we have to understand the religion and its origins, like to understand the Bible or the Holy Book as a tool of resistance, because in its essence, in its spirit, it's anti-colonial. So this is the idea, and therefore we use it against those who abuse religion and use religion to enslave human beings. We have to have a criteria. The criteria is very important. Without criteria, religion can be misused. We have to have a criteria. For us, as a theology of liberation, this is what we mean. Our criteria is whether this theology is used to liberate or enslave. And this reminds me of the bazaar in the old city of Jerusalem. You find anything you want. If you want texts which call for the liberation, you'll find them. And if you want something else, you'll find it. What you find in the Bible or the Quran reflects your identity more than the identity of the book itself. This is an important. And the question is this a secondary element rather than a leading element? I think our theology is linked to the context, and what Dr. Omar said, that there is the theology which is suitable for every time and place, and it's dynamic and it's not stagnant. In our understanding, it deals with all the issues facing Palestinian people, because the occupation influences everything in our lives, from water to transportation to everything else. So therefore, the Bible responds to existential issues and questions. So therefore, it is of the essence, but not in the sense that it's leading the battle, at least in the Palestinian context. Maybe the number of the Palestinians is relatively small. Maybe in South Africa it's a different story. The Christians are the majority, and the theology of liberation they developed played a much bigger role than Palestine. In my opinion, there is not a distinguishing remarks between the theology or theological studies in Turkey and the rest of the Islamic world, especially in Tunisia, for example, in Zaytuna and elsewhere, and Dar al-Ulum, or human sciences as they are known in the Tunisian context. I think this is normal, that all these trends and methodologies that you talked about as examples from the Tunisian context are present, or the similarities are there in the Turkish context. But maybe what we should try to correct here is that what is called the historian, as I understand it, is a complex phenomena, because the idea itself is complex. For example, in your question I discovered that there is a misconception which leads to the kind of questions which this methodology does not deserve to be discussed or asked about, because the discussion is not confined on the Quranic rulings or the verses which contain these rulings regarding punishing certain crimes, but they are within the realm of the nature of the Quranic text itself. It is a written text, or is it an oral text, or is it a discourse, a universal discourse to the rest of the world? Is this possible, humanly possible from the point of view of language? Because the Quran is revealed in a certain language, which is the Arabic language. So therefore, can the Quran, being only in Arabic, to address everyone, everywhere, at all times and all places? Now, the speaker on the addressee of the Quran is all rotates all these questions on these principles. And the question regarding the rulings in the Quran, for example, the chopping of the hand of the thief becomes irrelevant, or is not that important, because if the Quran is a historical discourse directed or targeting a certain group of people who used to live or exist at that time, so it's directed to them. So therefore, it is, if it's directed towards a certain people at a certain period of time, does this mean that its authority is limited and confined to them? Yes, this is the opinion of those people. I think we have come to the end. I think we have come to the end of this third and final session of today. Hoping to meet Dr. Elizabeth. Is there something you want to say? We have a trip. We can't hear the lady. The sound is disconnected. Amen.